May 14th meeting of the Planning Commission will come to order. Please call the roll.
Knight.
Present.
Martin.
Here.
Middleton.
Present.
Bruno.
Here.
Gillum.
Here. First order of business, you have received a copy of the April 9th minute. Are there any corrections or additions?
Motion to approve.
Second. We have a motion.
Knight.
Present.
Martin.
Agree.
Martin.
Aye.
Middleton.
Aye.
Bruno.
Aye.
Gillum.
Aye. Are there any revisions or corrections to the agenda that we need to make? Seeing none, it will stand as printed. First item of business.
A zoning amendment at 7900 Jacksonville Cutoff from R3 to MHP, Hapless Marlar agent.
Kevin.
So before you, there's a staff report. I won't read graphics on it. And obviously see the location of this parcel with respect to some of the surrounding properties as well as the surrounding buildings. Graphics for this area.
And yes, your microphone on.
All right, I'm going to speak a little louder. Everybody can hear me all right? So when I do reports for this board and others, you'll see graphics such as this where it's basically color coding and land use, and the solid blue line represents zones. The zones are labeled on your map bold blue as well. See that the subject property is situated uniquely. On one side you have commercial zoning C3 with some commercial designations on the existing land use, not the future land use, the adopted land use. But you also have some residential and R3 on the opposing side. This is one where you have a mobile home park that was established many years ago and essentially was provided a zoning classification. Well, folks have come in today and are requesting a rezone. And in particular, they're requesting senior for mobile home park zoning from R3. And the main reason for that is because they want to come in and be able to remove, replace, without being hampered by some of the R3 zoning. One of the things I wrote in the report has to do with density. And under the existing conditions analysis, you'll note that there was an 11th dwelling unit or manufactured home at the site at some point between 2006 and 2009. You can kind of see it. I'm going to kind of wave my hand on the cursor. This unit actually, it appears on the aerial photos, and you can see that the building envelopes layer in the GIS was actually created, assuming that was there, and it is there. But the original plan in the county assessor's office has it as 10 individual improvements. So under today's regulations, if it were to be mobile home park, the density unit per acre threshold is 10. So they have to remove one of those. You couldn't exceed 10 dwelling units per acre under the mobile home zoning classification that they are recommending. So in essence, that's the condition that staff would recommend that we impose on this particular approval, but the staff is recommending approval. Basically, it would allow the existing class of manufactured home and possible construction or replacement of an upgraded class of manufactured home. MHP zone also provides for allowable density achievable via the removal of the single unit. So this is feasible given that the site accommodated one less unit many years ago, up to 2 years, 2006 and 2009 time period that was added. And this was just based off of a Google Earth time lapse. You can kind of look at Google Earth and slide the rule back in time, and you can kind of see when that 11th unit pops up. So I essentially use that as a case to say that the zoning would be conditional, that the allowable density for the site now and in the future not exceed any development rate. And with that, I will answer questions.
Do you see any problem with the fact that the land use plan currently calls for low density residential?
Talking about
What does the plan show?
This is the adopted land use. So this actually has it as manufactured homes.
Okay.
Brown color. They impose a land use classification synonymous with the actual use on the ground. It just happens to be zoned R1. Oh, sorry, R3. Excuse me, R3. That's the current zone. It was zoned R1 at one point. One of the other things that probably complicated that a little bit, but I had access to the rezoning layer, if you will, and that is in those little striations. You can see those lines that kind of run southwest and northeast on the graphic. Those are old zoning piece boundaries. But back when those zones were put in place, it wasn't necessarily a discussion on getting into the weeds with den development.
Do we have confirmation that notices have been sent out, signs have been posted?
Mine was in place today.
Okay, this calls for a public hearing. I will now open the floor for any comments that anybody wishes to make on this application. Does anybody wish to speak? You would come up and sign in.
Yeah.
Okay, if you would, your name and address.
My name is Jeremiah Blakely, address 9500 Meadow Creek Drive. And I'm the purchaser. I purchased this property less than a year ago, and I just bought it as a rental property. So the man I bought it from told me it was probably my fault I didn't check to see if he had a, I can't remember what the thing's even called, privilege license, to work in the city. I have a park in Jacksonville, a privilege license. I bought the park. I didn't have one. They sent me a application, paid the fee, and I've always paid the fee. So I also have another business, and I'm out of the Marble guy, so I have a privilege license for that. So when I come down to apply to get this privilege license piece of property, they said I couldn't get one. So they said this was a non-compliant property because I guess when it was annexed in, it wasn't, they didn't want to pay the fee or whatever. So I wanted the property where I want to keep the property looking nice. I want it to look good. It's a good looking park. I have mostly single parent, in there. They're good tenants. Had any trouble at any of them? Only problem I've had there's a woman run through my fence from the Eagle Bank. Run through there and run back too. That's the only problem I've had. I don't think the property would ever be used for, it's so narrow. I don't think you could use it for apartments, whatever, So I just want it where I can keep the property looking good. And if I need to move a trailer in or out, I don't have to come, to a meeting every time. And, I don't mind coming, getting a permit or whatever, whatever you got to do. I don't want to break the law, but I don't want to have to, go through this situation every time.
But we're so friendly.
Well, I would rather it be that I have it like I thought it was when I purchased it, sir. So I'm not trying to do nothing funny or anything like that. I just want the property where I can use it and have a good retirement property.
Any commissioner have a question?
I just wondered, do the trailers have natural gas? Right?
No, sir.
They don't? Okay, and
They're all electric.
All electric, and is there a sewage system or what?
City sewer.
City sewer? Okay.
And when I purchased the property, there's a little house on the front. The previous owner, he blocked it out because his mother lives in there, like 90-something years old. I'm supposed to buy the property. I mean, we have it in contract, and she does whatever she does, moves or go to nursing home or whatever. I'm going to purchase that also.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? I'll call the hearing closed. Do you have questions of Kevin or staff?
Or staff?
I'm sorry?
Staff recommendation.
Staff's recommendation is to approve the request with the condition that the density per acre not exceed 10, which is the mandate under the rest of zoning.
Were there any issues with setbacks?
There are going to be some setback, what I would call blanket variances if and when this thing comes in for an overall replat or something that I would regard as legitimizing the existing conditions. You will probably have maybe rear setback for easternmost property line, its relation back to those. There could be, but again, this is all rolled under, it's the class of mobile homes that you have there wouldn't necessarily be allowed in R3 and not even in R4, but you can have them in mobile home park. Basically, it allows for a full gamut of upgraded class of mobile home if they were to be replaced. And yes, there could be some setback issues, but those would have to be dealt with either on a case-by-case basis, or we would have to. I would rather, as a planner, see it come in as a single plat to legitimize all of them and recognize it as the non-conforming use, and then take that non-conforming use away by plat. You can do that if you go through the process of platting it as is.
I don't see any reason to go from 11 to 10 the way they're all hooked up to a sewer. They're hooked up to electricity, and if you say arbitrarily we're going to take one out and get rid of it, you're not going to be able to scoot them this way and that way to have 10 equally spaced. It's just essentially throwing away one. I think it's fine with 11. Well,
Would 10 not only bring the density in to the 10 units per acre, but would it also help with the setbacks?
Well, just on a zoning perspective, the way our code is written now is that if they go from mobile home park zoning and you can't exceed 10, you're not allowed, you would essentially make it not a non-conforming. You'd make the site in violation of the existing zoning density, and they would need to have, I suppose, a variance to allow the buildable density greater than 10 per design. That's what you would.
I'd hate to make a decision going into it knowing that it was violating the regulation. In fairness, it would make more sense to me to say if it ever moves out, it can't be replaced.
And that would be true under its existing zoning. The only thing I would say is that if you can tell here that parcel points were put in place by the assessor's office, they didn't count that 11th because it didn't exist. The assessor still thinks there's only 10 there. They moved an 11th on, and I'm not sure if it's been permitted or not, but they definitely moved an 11th on over time. So again, that's beyond me, as they're just existing conditions. So I will let you all obviously make that call.
is this piece of property exactly 1 acre or what? Acre and a quarter?
An acre and a quarter. The manufactured home portion of it's about 1.04. That's the subject of the zoning request. The front part that contains existing home would retain an R3 zone until such time as they move to a different zone.
Want to go for a motion to approve with condition?
Condition being,
as set forth by the staff. You know, the 10th one has to be removed, or the 11th one has to be removed. Conform with the zone.
there's a motion. Is there a second?
Now or at some point in the future, it just
Some
can't
point
be
in the future.
can't be replaced.
Yeah, I would go with that where it can't be.
Can't be replaced rather than the
I don't want to move somebody
I don't
out.
want to move somebody out.
Yeah, that's why I asked him.
Well, make it clear, the motion is that you approve with the condition that the 11th unit, if it
Cannot
ever
be
goes
replaced.
away, cannot be replaced.
That is the motion.
Everybody got it? Hold the roll.
Second.
We have a second.
We were waiting on a question.
Knight,
Approved.
Martin.
Aye.
Middleton.
Aye.
Bruno.
Aye.
Gillum.
Aye.
That will now go to the city council for approval. Next item, item number 6.
A zoning amendment at 8800 Brockington from R1 to C3. JWJ Investments, owner.
Okay, the subject property is at 8800 Brockington Road. The consideration before the Planning Commission tonight is from the existing zone of R1 to C3. The proposal is to rezone a portion of the 3.75 acre parcel. Essentially, the western 2/3 or 2.38 acres is what we're speaking about tonight. Property owner is JWJ Investments LLC, care of Mr. Steve Jenkins, managing member. Right now, you have an existing land use as institutional, and current land use is a house of worship, church, although it is vacant. It has been for some time. The land use has adopted as instituted. The adjacent land uses, as you can see, the colors on your map relative to the west are manufactured home, commercial and retail on the south side, multifamily residential on the east side, and the west single-family residential. Current zone is R1, and they're proposing to go to C3. The proposed use, I put this in our reports, but the use is to be determined. There had been some discussion internally with staff about prospective tenants. The property owner has acquired it, and they're entertaining uses. Right now, uses are predicated on what the zone is, and sometimes the uses that are coming in from the landowner's perspective is driving the decision on what zone to ask for. And so in this instance, they're asking for C3 because in staff's view, they're asking for that because it's sort of the highest and best. Have it into, not necessarily have cover letters that state what the purpose is. Again, officially, they just are asking for C3 on the application. The relevant code sections here are the conditional uses in R1 as well as our scheduled uses. You can see on your report here we have the site highlighted with the light blue. It's also as the Blue Institute use. You can see that the property is a block recessed north of Peel Avenue. Brockington at this point isn't necessarily fully commercial. I will note here that the future land use plan, which we will go over later on this evening, does call for Brockington in this area to transition, if you will, to some level of commercial because the majority of Brockington as you move forward north of here is commercial. However, from a policy perspective, I guess the only thing staff can do is look at the existing documentation and existing policy maps, which is essentially what drives a lot of the decisions in the report today. You can see on the north side, there's manufactured homes, still residential, and off to the west and northwest, it's also residential, established single-family detached, and off to the east in the R3 zone, you have some medium density residential, and of course you have your commercial corridor to the south, which is primarily C3. Again, back to the intake, we don't have a cover letter that states exactly what's to be used on the site. There had been some other uses that staff had corresponded with the applicant on. One, I believe, was a flea market use that would be occurring on the interior of the existing structure, and then another conversation. I'm not exactly sure what the other uses might be. Maybe a school site. Now, schools, as a matter of use, are allowed as conditional in the R1. So if the school was the thing that was being proposed here, you wouldn't necessarily need to property, but the application still asks for C3. That is what they're asking today. Bring up now that they have selected regulations in your report. One is the conditional uses that are allowed in the R1. Again, as stated, you have churches and other religious institutions that their accessory buildings are allowed in the R1. And educational institutions included but not limited to colleges, universities, public and private elementary schools, and so on and so forth. Of the 6 uses allowed as conditional use in the R1 zone, sub-item 1 speaks to the churches and other religious institutions, whereas 2 speaks to educational institutions. Again, speaking to some of the other uses that had been proposed for this site but not officially on the application. Similarly, section 141013, schedule of uses, outdoor flea market is listed. It doesn't say that it'd be indoor flea market, but an outdoor flea market. It's similar uses and frequencies that found in a general commercial zone or C3. So that would necessarily conform to a C3, but we do not know exactly what the use would be here. So as a result, we don't know what the use will be. A policy plan calls for institutional today. It is a transition. There's surrounding residential on all sides. And although the future land use plan may call for some intensification along the Brockton corridor, staff doesn't have those resources adopted as law. So right now, the non-residential or non-institutional uses would not be in keeping with the city's land use plan. The Plan Commission should examine the subject parcel against the larger Brockton corridor and ascertain what, if any, future land use category change would be applicable. If a future land use category change is recommended by the Commission, the land use map should be changed prior to any intensification. So I think because see on the land use map now, you definitely have a defined commercial in the pink. But here, if you run left and right or east and west, you have residential. So there's definitely a break between the commercial and residential, independent of the zone. You have an institutional use as was here, but it's also allowed in a residential zones. In this point in space, you do actually have a very clear demarcation between the commercial corridor and the residential area. Now, what would be the appropriate transition? I am not sure. Based on the information at my disposal, I would recommend specifically for C3 be denied. It's the staff's position. I'll entertain any questions the board may have.
I looked at the current land use map, and it's a little bit difficult to figure out because it looks like it's something like public and something like attached single family. Well, then we looked at, and the real issue here is we don't need to know what's being proposed. What we need to know is whether this should go commercial. And right now, current plan does not anticipate that, and the draft plan doesn't either. So if we're going to do something, if we're going to consider going commercial, we need to first consider what the land use plan should look like and change it. Am I understanding that correctly?
That is correct. That's essentially what the staff is.
Okay, at this point, we'll open up a public hearing and let anybody who wishes to comment on this application speak. If you will, sign in.
Sure.
Your name and address, sir?
Yes, sir. My name is Steve Jenkins. My address is 7200 Industry Drive in North Little Rock. I am, along with my family, owner of JWJ Investments, the property that's in question. I just wanted to come up and kind of tell you kind of why we're doing or requesting what we're requesting. We own the shopping center that's right at the corner of Brockington Hill. across the street from Atco. Kind of surprises me to see this commercial. It's on a brand new 5-lane Brockington Road immediately across the street's drugstore. We bought the property I think 4 years ago with the eye to future development. In the meantime, we'd like to rent the property. We'd like for it to not be vacant. We did, in fact, rent the property to a church for 3 years. They occupied that, moved out about a year and a half ago. Been for rent since. Had a fair amount of interest from different people. What precipitated this, gentleman mentions a flea market. I'm sure all of y'all are familiar with the little flea market antique mall that occupies the space at the corner of North Hills Boulevard, and I think that's Country Club. And as y'all know, that property has been purchased, and the lady that owned that little building was looking desperately, quickly, for a place to put her flea market, however you want to classify it. She approached us about it, and it could be a good spot. I don't know if it's zoned properly. You'd have to check into zoning. So I've got to do something 2 months. So we've got to do something, and I just don't know what I'm going to do. So we said, well, we've lost potential tenants in the past due to their concern about what the zoning would be. Other than a church going in there, I guess it single family it could be a residence. It is zoned R1, but it has kind of prohibited us from putting anything else in there. In this particular lady's case, she was worried enough about it that she has moved on, that I don't see that I can get zoning on it quick enough so we can get applied and see. So she has moved on. At that time, I couldn't get an answer from her. Well, should I continue with the rezoning? As you know, it's not inexpensive to rezone. Just on speculatively that something else might go in there. We've opened it up. So in talking with the staff at the city office, we thought that C3 would be best suited for the different types of things that could go in there. Had a good bit of interest recently in a private school, a private elementary school. They've looked at the property twice. C3 is the zoning for a private school. A church could still go in C3. The lady that wanted that, she's already decided to stay out on 107. But that type of business. So the C3 seemed to give us the greatest amount of flexibility to be able to put a property in there or a tenant in there that would be suitable for that area. And I see as a highly commercial 5-lane highway until at some point in the future we see future development. Built several shopping centers here in Sherwood. We don't have a plan to do that right now. And should that come up, obviously, we'd be back here before you. This is more of an eye to the future, but an opportunity to take a non-performing property, its highest and best use. Taxable.
Any questions? So what you're saying is, you don't have any idea what you would be recommending?
Right now, we're not recommending anything. It is, as you've driven by it, I'm sure you see the big for rent sign out there. So we're obviously it would be something that would be C3. We're kind of taking a chance. Again, check with the city. Say, look, what if we go through this process and then, daycare wanted to be there? Could they be there? Under C3, they could be. Under R1, I think would we have to get a conditional use or special use for daycare?
For daycare, I don't think there are specific rules about setback.
In R1. So it seemed like C3 gave us more flexibility for the different. And that's been our greatest.
We got a mobile home park to the north, and we have C3 commercial to the south, and Over to the east, we have a large apartment complex, and we've got a 5-lane road on the left. To me, there's only two possibilities, and that is C3 and R3. And I think if the owner wants to try C3, it looks like a winner to me.
Well, the question is, what should the plan show?
What should what?
What should the plan show? It can't go C3 until the plan says it's commercial. And right now it says it's public and attached single family.
Well, then we need to change it to C3 then.
Oh, to some form of commercial anyway.
The adopted land use is institution. Just daycares, day nursery or daycares are not allowed. They're conditional in R2, R3, R4. Not allowed.
But would be in C3.
They are allowed.
I would point out, and I know all of y'all are very familiar with Brockton, so forgive me for pointing out the obvious, but immediately north of the mobile home park is a lumber company, a convenience store, a clinic, pretty much all commercial.
I think her land use plan is just lagging behind a little bit on the corridor. And I can see the whole thing being commercial one of these days.
Oh, well, does anybody else wish to speak? If not, I'll call the public hearing closed. The issue, technically, the land use plan needs to change if you want to go with this kind of zoning classification. And that calls for another public hearing. Now, we've got a couple of options here if you think this is appropriate. If we turn it down tonight, technically they can't come back for a year unless we waive that. If we table it and wait for a public hearing to decide if we want to change the land use plan, which to allow something like this, that's an option. Is that correct?
Motion to table.
But be specific on what the time frame of that is so that Mr. Jenkins understands. And I mean, which is 60.
The planning
meetings
commission
from now
would approve a land use plan, but it's always a good idea for the council to also approve it. If we had a public hearing next month and approve for a commercial use on that property, we could take up the issue of rezoning this to
July.
coincide with the plan.
That works.
In June or July.
That would be in June.
Okay. I just want Mr. Jenkins to hear that.
I don't have anything, as I've mentioned, I don't have anyone just standing in line saying, "Oh, we got to do this next month." So I certainly have no problem with it being tabled and land use plan appropriately, because there's nobody just saying we got to do something.
I think asking for commercial in this sense is appropriate, but the technicality of the land use plan is yes, sir. Yes, sir.
He's right.
Okay. Back to your motion.
Motion to table till next month's meeting where we can have a public hearing on the rezoning.
On the land use
On the land use plan.
On the land use plan.
Yeah.
Could we call a special meeting on the land use plan, say in 2 weeks or something? Put it in the paper?
Well, not in 2 weeks, because it would take 15 days notice in the paper. But he says there's nothing pressing, so I would say no. I'd say June's soon enough. So we got a motion,
I second Mr. Bruno's motion.
and that was to table until next month and to call a public hearing to amend potentially the land use plan.
Yes, sir. That is the way I understand it.
Knight,
I hate to leave Mr. Jenkins. I in favor of the
Martin.
Aye.
Middleton.
Aye.
Bruno.
Aye.
Gillum.
Aye.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is on me.
On you,
On me.
for you.
After the last meeting, we approved recommending to send revisions to the Chapter 14 on the Board of Zoning Adjustment up to the council. And what I always like to do before I go to the council, I like to mark it up so I can see and tell them exactly what did we change and what did we add. And as I was reviewing that, I got concerned as I was looking at these. Basically, the first thing that concerned me was how you had to post signs. And it referred back to another section in the zoning code, and that section was rezones. And what that said was that you have to leave signs up until the planning commission makes a decision on that rezone or the city council makes a decision. But this is the Board of Zoning Adjustment, and neither of those bodies has any decision to make. And so it was inconsistent with what the Board of Zoning Adjustment would require. At the same time, the requirements for the signs and for the public hearing for both the appeal and for the variance were different. And it just seems to me that those two things are pretty much the same. I mean, there's different criteria for getting a decision made, but in terms of hearing notices and signs and so forth, they ought to be consistent, not different. In fact, the hearing requirement didn't even have a fee required. And obviously these things were done at separate times. So I thought, if we're going to do this, let's do it right. Let's get this cleaned up once and for all so that it makes sense and is consistent. The other thing, the other big item, at least for me, I said, okay, let's look at what the state statute requires for the Board of Zoning Adjustment. That's a very unique body. And what the statute says is if you're going to have zoning, then you will adopt a Board of Zoning Adjustment. And that board will have two functions. It will hear appeals from decisions of the enforcement officer, and it will hear requests for variances. Those are the two things it will do. I went through the entire code, and there are 10 assignments given to the Board of Adjustment, and only 2 of those are in the law. So it seems to me if we're going to fix this, let's fix it right and take those things that don't belong in the Board of Adjustment and put them over to the Planning Commission. It's the same people, but they have different responsibilities. I said, okay, let's change all of those other powers because there really aren't other powers. Let's get it consistent. And with the hearing requirements, I mean, the original draft did say something to the effect of you've got to advertise 7 days instead of the 15 that is required for an amendment or something like that. But what the issue is that every meeting of the Board of Zoning Adjustment has to be advertised. And that advertisement has to list what business is going to be undertaken. And it's not an advertisement of what the issue is like it is for a rezone. It's an advertisement that the Board of Adjustment is meeting. Unlike the Planning Commission, the Board of Adjustment does not have to meet any specific number of times. It only has to meet when there's business for the meeting to take place. By city ordinance, it's required to meet at least 4 times a year, which is fine. So I changed it, or I'm recommending changing it instead of every month. Let's set it to what the bylaws require. And right now, the bylaws require a meeting every month at the same time and same place. The city ordinance doesn't. So I wanted to change that up a little bit. The other thing is that those other 8 items that are in the zoning code that were referenced as belonging to the Board of Zoning Adjustment, I wanted to go through there and make sure that we weren't creating a problem. And the only one that I really that I really thought we needed to fix was there were 2 sections in there having to do with the Board of Adjustment altering zoning district boundaries. And it basically had to do if the map was drawn poorly and of zoning district boundaries got in the middle of a property instead of along the property line, the Board of Adjustment could fix that. Well, We'll make the planning commission can fix it. And there was another provision in there that was roughly the same thing. And I said, okay, it's fair enough that the planning commission can alter a minor discrepancy, but I wanted to make sure that it could not, in effect, abrogate the responsibility of the city council, because only the city council can amend the map and rechange the zoning of an individual property. So if it's simply saying, okay, we've got a line dividing in this property from R1 and C3, we'll pick one or the other. And all we're doing is correcting the line. But we're not going to say it's R1 and C3, let's make it R2. We can't do that. And that's all what that amendment was doing. And basically, otherwise, what the changes were doing was simply saying, okay, we're assigning this to the planning commission instead of the board of zoning adjustment. I had some concern about that, but there are some issues that we can take up at a later time. For instance, it gave the responsibility to the board that if you want to put up a communication tower other than a monopole, you sent that to the board. Now you send it to the planning commission, but it still doesn't tell you what's the basis of the decision, what kind of options could we look at, well, I don't know what those should be, but it's no different than what it is now, except that it's going to the commission instead of the board. I mean, all of that was partly to try and make some sense out of this, and partly to let's get this in compliance with state law. Do you have any questions? And because this is a significant change over and above what was discussed at the last meeting, we decided it would be good to have a public hearing on this, so anybody that had some questions about it could speak to that. And for any questions right now, I will open a public hearing up. Anybody wishes to speak to the Board of Zoning Adjustment revisions. Anybody?
I think you've answered my question. I did have a couple of questions, and all of these duties that are lined through would be reassigned to the planning commission?
Everything that wasn't currently in the board in chapter 14 that were referenced elsewhere in the zoning code would be reassigned to the planning commission.
Okay, and these items that are currently in chapter 14, other powers, particularly item 3, where it says permit the extension of a non-conforming use. We've got a couple of forms in our office that we just routinely use when it comes up, steps to expand a non-conforming use. And expansion of non-conforming use requires a public hearing before the Sherwood Board of Adjustments. Would this all go to the Planning Commission now?
Yes. Okay. If it isn't an appeal of a decision or a request for a variance, it would go to the Planning Commission.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Call the public hearing closed. Gentlemen, questions?
This will make it conform to the state law, to your knowledge.
Yes.
That's a good idea to me.
Motion we send this to the city council for their approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second as drafted.
As drafted.
Knight,
Yes.
Martin.
Aye.
Middleton.
Aye.
Bruno.
Aye.
Gillum.
Aye.
Good job.
Thank you. I hope in the future not to switch gears after we've approved something, but this one just felt like we need to get it right.
I agree, but with what we noted.
Okay. Next item is a council resolution on public works rezone request, old business. Kevin?
Yes, sir. So when we met last on this, there were several pointed items that the board had questioned, and for the right reasons satisfy the resolution that was passed by the city council with respect to Jacksonville Cato Road, 9121, Jacksonville Cato Civic. the report you're looking at isn't very much different from the last one you reviewed. The main difference is, though, that we wanted to make sure we address some of those items that the board had looked at. So your relevant code sections are listed before you, and one of the ones we wanted to make sure that we looked at was making sure that 14.210 uses exclusively conditional. This is where you start to get into that policy statement, although it's codified. It's a larger qualifier when you're talking about these particular types of uses. So what I did was I added a recommendation that we add item E, this list, that speaks to municipally owned public works facilities, and have that serve as an additional use that's inherently conditional amongst the others that you see, particularly utility substations, utility storage yards, because again, you can have those things on the private side run by a private corporation, but as we can see, we can also get a similar intensity at the publicly or municipally owned level. So that's why that language is added. So that's new. 14.4.1D, conditional uses in the R1 zone specifically. And we're adding an item in here, item number 4, again, getting back into uses may be permitted in the zone, conditional use for the following submissions. Added again, municipally owned public works buildings and facilities when necessary for serving the surrounding area. Another check down, if you will, regulations for this particular type of use. Again, not rezoning it, just leaving the existing R1 zone in place, but adding an additional check down.
Question.
Yes, sir.
Why are you restricting it to surrounding area?
Well, the language here just speaks to serving the surrounding area. So if you're talking about municipally owned public services or public works facilities or a utility, that's similar language that you see elsewhere. That, you know, if you're going to apply for a conditional use permit, it's up to the boards and the commissions to determine what is serving, right? What is that public benefit? What is that public use? But you want to make sure that they are listed in uses that are inherently conditional and also uses that are conditional in that particular zone class to help qualify or help support a possible approval for that type of conditional use permit in the R1 zone.
Guess my only question, leave it up to you gentlemen, as to whether it should be limited to surrounding area or citywide.
We add the word city and surrounding area to that?
I was thinking we just say, when necessary for serving the municipality.
Say the municipality, or since municipally owned is already in it, you could say public benefit. Public benefit's another way to put that.
I mean, we're going to serve the whole city, but we're not going to service in the county. So,
But we don't know that yet. You know, there could be little fingers or something that offshoots from there in the future. Well, you might still want to have a little bit of the surrounding area.
Well, if we're speaking of municipally owned, which is the distinction, you could say serving the taxpayer, say the citizen. You could say a lot of things, but I do think the language should be very focused to that public, that citizenry, because that's the municipally owned part of it, because they are we.
Well, a lift station's publicly owned, and it serves the surrounding area.
That's a very unique infrastructure. You all know tends to spread and doesn't necessarily have to be coincident with jurisdictional.
Move on.
Schedule of uses, this is the same language that was in the last Planning Commission report. The land use policy and the zoning classification, again, just getting into the resolution for the city council, and that they do want this municipally owned facility to move forward. They do not necessarily want this thing to stay intense if it doesn't go through. But from a practical standpoint, if the city owns it and they want to move forward with a replacement facility that has a shelf life of at least 15 to 25 years or more. The reversionary aspect of it, while cautionary, is not very feasible, not very likely. That being said, there are ways to add language into our existing uses for conditional uses that allow this to move forward in a way that satisfies the resolution of that city. So the staff is recommending 3 items: revise section 14210B, uses exclusively conditional as stated previously; revise section 14401D, conditional uses in the R1 zone as mentioned previously; and revise section 141013, schedule of uses, by adding the following row. I did not take the whole table, I simply added the one where the C would be municipally owned public works buildings and facilities when necessary preserving the surrounding area. Again, if language has
As I recall, I think the council said words to the effect of what makes this special is that it serves the entire city.
the usable life, and the public works director can, of course, speak more succinctly to this, but this is a replacement facility, and the original facility that's there now in North Hills is going to transition to this new site,
Which serves the entire city.
This will allow them to grow approximately 3 times the area. It has a lot of room to grow. It also has a lot of room to mitigate if and when it comes before the commission in terms of its site plan. Obviously, we can start looking at it from the specific site and the buffering, all the other aspects. But from a use standpoint, this language that we're proposing today does satisfy the resolution. That's what the city council did.
So you're basically proposing 3 revisions to the code to allow this to happen properly.
Correct. Allow the code to be intelligent enough to allow the use.
Gentlemen, do you have any questions? And the next step would be to schedule a public hearing to put this out to the public. Are you comfortable with doing that? Next month we hold the public hearing on this.
Put it on the agenda for June.
Do I understand that we're gonna change it to read necessary for serving the city?
That would be my suggestion.
I like that.
The surrounding area would get struck by city.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
In those 2 places.
Okay, we will have a public hearing on this in June. A revision of the zoning code concerning accessory buildings.
For the last planning commission meeting, there was a discussion, not only from myself, but from some other staff members that are more familiar with the subject matter. But accessory building setbacks in the city have been historically and today become an issue administratively because the language in the regulations essentially says that the planning commission has to determine in cases of setback variance right now for accessory structures. And because of the frequency, staff was of the mind, and we still believe that the planning commission would rather not see an inordinate or a high frequency amount of what we would regard administratively as minor requests for accessory buildings that just so happen to encroach on the side and the rear setback. And so to that end, there are some recommendations in your staff report to revising the code. And in your report, you can see the table is still pretty much intact. I can let Mr. Wilson behind me kind of speak to this a little bit more. But the language at the end of that is called exception. And as it reads today, as it reads in your report, not today, instead of the planning commission, it would say the Sherwood Permit and Planning Department shall have the authority to reduce side and rear yard setbacks to 4 feet if it can be demonstrated that all the following criteria were met. And at this point, one thing I will say, and Mr. Wilson, I'll ask him to come up in a moment, is that the language that's in there now also states that there's language in there that speaks to this is not to be considered a variance, this is not to be considered this, that, and the other thing, but that's under the context of the planning commission looking at it. If the administrative staff is going to be looking at these things, there obviously doesn't need to be language regarding, well, is it a variance or it isn't because it's being done administratively in the first place. So that's why that language is absent under the exception language here. And then there's items A through ABC, and that's supposed to be D, is a typo. But I'm going to ask Mr. Wilson to step up here and help address some other questions. He is the staff subject matter expert.
I want to clarify that the revision that we were asking for initially had more to do with, finding the right term exception for the times we were going to talk about making an exception and reducing the setbacks from what's in the table down to as close as 5 foot. And kind of towards the the end of the last meeting, I did suggest that at the time that, historically, we based our accessory structures in Sherwood for, I guess the last 25 years or so on being 25% of the square footage of the principal structure. And we had 4 foot side yard and rear yard setbacks, and that was it. And the result of that was, we got frequently had requests for larger buildings. That was probably the number one request that we had. The setbacks really just never came up because everybody was happy with 4 foot, et cetera, et cetera. And what changed so drastically just in review is a year and a half, 2 years ago, the planning commission and the city council made a drastic change in what people are able to do with accessory structures. And we essentially went from a limit of a 10-wall sidewall height to 17 foot in certain circumstances. And then we went to increase the building size in a lot of cases up to 3,500 feet. On the smaller side, just on city lots, it went from 25% of the square footage to half the square footage of the principal dwelling. So a lot bigger buildings now. And along with that, we've kind of been trying to fine tune it. And in one of the revisions, James, our planner, came up with this chart to help us, look at the different rules for the different lot sizes and that sort of thing. And in this zoning code revision attempt, one of the issues that came under scrutiny when we were discussing it in our PRC meeting was that one of the revised ordinances said if we were going to consider essentially an exception is what we're going to use. That's the term we're going to use. If we're going to consider the exception to these setbacks, there was some latitude given to the planning commission during one of these visions to review those. And at some point we talked about that would be appropriate for that to be the Board of Adjustments, not the Planning Commission. And now we're trying to eliminate those extra responsibilities to the Board of Adjustment. So all this has kind of come into play. And one of the things I said at the last meeting, when this first came out, that we started allowing these really big structures, it's true that we were asked on a departmental level if we wanted to have that responsibility to make these exceptions. We said we didn't. We were kind of afraid of it, and we didn't know what all the consequences were going to be because this was a big change. And I did say that we were comfortable taking that responsibility now, but I'm not suggesting that's the will of this body. We've had several discussions with Kevin and staff over the last week about, and I'm trying to get, what is the will of this body concerning that particular question? If, do we don't want the Board of Adjustments to be responsible for reviewing exceptions. Is that true? Okay. Do we want the Planning Commission, or do we want it to be a staff level decision?
For the most part.
Yeah. To interpret it and do what's best, unless it's something way out of line.
I guess I'll make the same observation that I would make, whether it was to the Planning Commission or to staff, that we need to know what the constraints are on that discretion. And as long as those decisions are made within those constraints, and it's an accessory structure, and there's enough built in there to protect adjacent properties, I don't have a problem with it. My problem has always been with some of the standards.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to chime in on it too, to say that if we have rules or guidelines, then we're comfortable following those. But if there was something, and there will definitely be something that comes up that's just not quite fitting all of these, that we can certainly bring that back to you. If the Planning Commission is also in the position to review these exceptions beyond what staff is approved to do.
To make a decision or to give advice?
I would ask that question, which would you like to do? Because there'll be a time when the rules are not exactly clear to us, and we would like to pass that back to you to be sure that it meets your will.
Let me reflect on that just a little bit, because and here again, these issues kind of came up late last week. We're discussing this, and I read through some old emails I had back when we were doing the storage bills. At one time, we were floating the idea. Somebody was floating the idea of it being a conditional use type decision. And I have a paragraph highlighted here from an email from Mr. Middleton to some of the people here, and it said, "In a more perfect world, I would prefer to see a bit more guidance to applicants, staff, and commissioners as to the parameters for considering a waiver or exception from the standards, but not a variance." Okay, and that's what we're talking about here. To that end, Candy sent a revised code revision concerning this subject, which is what we have up here, and I have added this section that you see on the board here as just kind of a starting place of the criteria. I set up some criteria that I want to have if I'm going to be the one looking at these applications and determining when there's an exception. The way this works is someone calls, says, "I want to build a storage building. What can I do?" We go through the chart with them, and in a lot of cases, they're going to go, "That's fine. We're good with that." And we're going to just stop right there. We're done with that conversation. Now, there's going to be cases where they're going to want to talk about an exception. One example I gave in some of the meetings we were talking about is, if somebody builds like a carport or garage, typically, and it's not a great big lot or an exceptionally deep lot. Typically, what they're going to want to do is they're going to want their driveway to be on the side of their house. They've got just enough room of a setback to have a driveway, and they're going to want the opening to that garage as close to that side as they can get it, so that they can thing. But if you've got 40 or 50 foot depth of a backyard and you're placing a garage, it really can pose a hardship of trying to maneuver a trailer or that kind of thing. So there are good reasons for somebody that might want to do an exception. So these are some criteria I came up with, and I'm not sure they're right, but this is what this says: the Sherwood Permit Planning Department shall have the authority to reduce side and rear yard setbacks to a minimum of 4 feet if it can be demonstrated that all of the following criteria are met. Okay. where the sidewall height does not exceed 10 feet. Just like in the old days. None of them did. So, so the 17-foot ones or anything above 10 feet, we're not going to consider it for an exception. Okay. B, where the accessory structure does not exceed 500 square feet in total area. Okay. That figure is derived from kind of the average size when we were basing things on 25% of the square footage of the principal dwelling, and it also is about the size of a double garage or carport, something like that. And I'm not saying that's necessarily the right figure. Our ordinance, earlier in the ordinance, says that on a lot half acre or less, you can build up to 850 square feet for an accessory structure. Maybe that's the right number to put here, okay? But what we have now, with these larger buildings, of course, the bigger the footprint, they've got a roof pitch on them, you get a taller building. And so that's where I was thinking, and then I'm going to move to the next item to discuss this more in length. I picked 25 foot in length or width. And here again, I'm trying to keep that footprint in either direction. We just come across some things where people wanted to build like a little pole barn shed all the way across their backyard or something like that. Something kind of weird for a residential area. Something that would be more trying to reduce that and then trying to reduce, super long dimensions in either direction, where if they pitch the roof along that longer dimension, you start building a really tall structure. Okay?
Especially when you're in the newer neighborhoods that got the bill of assurance that says the accessory structure's got to match the architecture of the house. So you're talking about 8, 12, 10, 12, 12 12 pitch roofs.
Right.
It starts to get tall.
Is there a height maximum on any structure? Overall?
Well, when I put where the sidewall height does not exceed 10 foot, at first when I wrote that, I said, or the overall height exceed, 15 foot, I think is what I put. And I decided, well, that's going to be limiting. And I was thinking of Blake, really, because I knew he was going to bring up the 12 for the, people want, some of the covenants do, they want your roof to match the pitch that's required in the neighborhood.
Sure
a new neighborhood that's 8, 12 or steeper.
Yes.
Is there any chance that 17-foot height, with 35 foot?
Not when we're talking about,
No.
Here's what I like. This is what I'll tell you I like. And last night I was thinking, I don't like the 25 foot because, a typical bass boat, anybody's had one, but, not the smallest one, but a medium-sized bass boat is going to take a 30-foot bay to park it. Okay? But we could just limit the square footage to like 500 to consider the exception. That's what I'm saying. If it's over that, we're not going to consider the exception. They have some
Overall,
okay.
Let's get over 35 feet.
Well, I think with a 500 square foot maximum, I can't see any way they could do that.
No, 25 feet wide and
a typical double bay garage is 20 by 25.
No, that's what I was thinking. It was 25 feet wide, 17 feet tall, and a 12, 12. You're still you're like pushing 30, but you're not 35.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that anything we did get after that zone.
Well, and that's something we have to consider with every application, regardless of its location on the lot. If they have a 17-foot sidewall and it's a big enough building and they want to try to put a steep roof, it's plausible they could. We have to look at that when we review the application.
Not using the 25-foot dimension is not.
But on the exception where we're allowing them to set it, this is back to like our old, think of the way we used to do things. When, and a lot of people, they want to build a double carport or a double garage to park their cars. They typically want it pretty close to their house. They really need it close to the property line. And at the same time, the guy that wants to build a toy shed and park his boat in there, he's going to need a deeper bay than 25 foot. So he might can go with a single wide garage with a 12-foot door on it that's 30 or 35 foot deep, still stay within the 500 feet. and it'd still be a reasonable sized building.
But with what you're saying there being, say, 12 by 30, won't meet your exception rule.
Well, I'm suggesting this may not be right. I mean,
Okay.
I'm like throwing this together at the last minute. So that's what I'm wanting to talk about. Maybe C's, I was thinking really after second thought, C's maybe not a good, a good criteria to have on there. Maybe just the square footage is sufficient.
Okay, so just talking out loud, thinking out loud a little bit. Okay, so
yeah, that's what we're doing.
We delete C, and I mean, you're the one that sees the application, so I mean, give us some thoughts. I mean, maybe we reduce because the chart is based at 200 and over 200, so maybe reduce the 500 a little bit, maybe. Or we take the 500 out and leave C in there. I mean, because 500 square feet is 20 by 25. I mean, I see where the number, you know what I'm saying?
What is so difficult to do, and what we've been struggling with ever since we did this, how do we come up with the right accessory structure ordinance that reduces variance to nil, and at the same time accommodate rural lots, people that want to build a carport next to their house, people that, want to build a shop or a garden shed or, something to keep their lawnmower in, and try to have one ordinance. It's difficult. I think our chart is good. Most people now, we don't have very many applications for variance anymore. Most people are just agreeable to this. And I think since we adopted this ordinance, I don't know that we've had maybe one or if any people wanting to apply for the exceptions. Now, we're getting some feedback in the department, especially on when my driveway's on the side of my house. I don't want to put the garage, especially the case of the garage where they have a driveway to the building. They want it where the opening is, on the same path.
Right. I may not be following you, but wouldn't the twin B and C pretty well dictate that it didn't get out of control? Because you'd have to meet both. I mean, if you could have a 50-foot long building.
I think it would. That's why I initially put it, and then I thought of the guy that wants to put a boat in his garage. It won't fit 25 foot in length. So maybe we should make that 30 or just, I don't know. That's what's so hard to do is, what is the right parameter here?
Because whatever number we pick, at some point it's going to be an exception to somebody. I mean, we just got to decide if.
Right. I mean, it's up for us to try to do the right thing. This is like, just to give you a scale, y'all probably remember this drawing, but this is a 25 by 30 deep garage with a couple of, small size sedans in it.
Yeah.
There are always going to be exceptions, and it just almost seems to me that if you had an oddball case where it needed to be 30 feet and your standard is 25, that's what you take to the planning committee.
As a
exception. An exception over and above the standard that's written into the code.
Let you operate in those guidelines, and then anything above what's in that guideline, say somebody wants to come with a 12 by 30 and want to push it to 4 feet off the side, that's when they can come to us.
Because what you've done is set your own constraints.
Do you think, say, 95 plus percentage of
Board of or when it was the planning commission's jobs to consider the exceptions, I didn't have to worry about it. So, y'all did, but now that it's...
Well, the question then is, with the conditions that you're putting on here, do you think they are realistic and would meet most of the issues you're likely to confront?
I'm comfortable with everything but C. I think that needs to be either omitted or we need to change it. Yeah, I don't know how to... If you change it to 30 feet, then you start getting...
How about you take B and C and combine it into one and put an or statement in there?
Actually, we leave B and we just change C to 30, and that'll take care of the boat. They will not be able to build a double bay garage that's 30 feet deep. They'll have to go to a single bay because that's all you can do with 500 feet, but that solves both.
Would that 500 feet now require a permit under the fire code?
Under the fire code, anything over a 200 square foot building requires a permit.
Would you be concerned about that kind of building next to another building next door?
No, because all these will meet the fire code.
What if I've got a 32-foot camper I want to put cover on?
You're gonna have to come talk to me.
Okay.
I'm just saying,
If
I get maybe the C, maybe you eliminate the C, that link, stick with the square. You can always eliminate the C and let market.
well, I'm okay with that. You know, you'll get the occasional, you know, you'll get the occasional oddball building, but it doesn't happen very often. But you know, in the case of the camper, you're going to probably need a 17-foot sidewall height, and you're going to
Then you're going to come see me anyway.
have to move. But yeah, we could eliminate C altogether, and why don't we try that and see, you know, see if it works out. I mean, that's the thing here. We're trying to get this right, but to have more flexibility for different citizens for their, you know, they're building these buildings for a lot of different reasons, and that would, you know, the guy would like to build a double, but he can't. If he wants to put it close to the property line, he can move it more to the center and maybe, you know, but he's got some options.
That's why I said, because the way you've written this, you have to meet all 4 criteria.
That's
so
right.
what I was
Or 3 criteria if we just
change it to if make B and C into one of saying if the square footage doesn't exceed 500, or you know, so that would give you the option if somebody brought to you 12 by 30, which is 360. He's under the 500. He's met that one. Then you can deal with it. He doesn't have to come see us.
But he's exceeded the 25.
But since you wrote in 2, as long as you meet one of the 2 criteria in one statement, not both. You got it written. He's got to meet both. I'm trying to give you the out of how to write the statement of be under the square footage, but over the length number. But you still have the authority to make the decision.
I'm trying to reflect this like all those criteria, or you know, that you can do this or can't do that, and I'm trying to follow that language. But if we're going to allow people to exceed 25 foot in length, regardless, let's just not have that in there. Let's just omit that statement and have 3 criteria.
Mr. Chairman, what's wrong with coming back? Said you have an exception every now and then. Now, what's wrong with coming back and dealing with it on an individual basis? Because he can't stand there and tell everything he's going to be looking at the next year. And if there's something that he's not comfortable with, I feel comfortable going with the staff recommendation. I just didn't want to go what the staff recommendation was. And if the staff recommends or was recommends something, we got questions, let him answer them. If we feel comfortable with them, go with them.
Now, this is why the first question is, do we want the planning commission to hear exceptions, or do we want staff to make these decisions? Because if staff's making these decisions to address what Richard said, the way this works is we have criteria and we're making the decisions based on these criteria, and they can appeal those decisions. But they really don't have an option anymore to, I mean, they have 2 options. They can either appeal or they can apply for a variance if, you know, if they think they, you know, we're going to course advise them against that now. But so I need set criteria that they, you know, as long as I'm going by this criteria. But to get off this, I just say we omit C. I think the 500 feet will take care of the.
Okay.
If enough flexibility in the 500 square foot limit will take care of the issue. And then the last criteria, that's supposed to be a D. I guess we have 2 Ds, but anyway.
It's going to be C here. It's going to be C now.
Accessory building has no openings toward either the side or rear property lines. Okay? What we're trying to avoid here is the person that wants to put a steeper roof on there and build a loft, because his real intentions is to have a little sleeping area up there or something, which, you know, that's not really what we're doing here. The but they always want to put a window in it, and people don't like it when there's a structure that's over the fence that has there's no need. So we're just going to say, if we're going to give you the exception and have the reduced setbacks, you cannot put a window or door that faces the rear or the side fence. I virtually have no applications where they want to do that anyway. They always want to put the doors facing the front or the open to the yard side of the building. So,
We say opening or door or window.
Well, it's going to be my question is opening
Cover for an RV. Like mine. Cover for an RV. Both ends are open. One potentially could be towards the rear of the property. It's not a law.
this is what I'm saying to qualify for the exception. In other words, on a city lot that's a half acre or less, I'm going to talk to your specific situation. Okay, you're allowed to build an accessory structure right now that has a sidewall height no greater than 10 foot. Right, and right now you can do it, and you have to be 8 foot off the property line, and you can have openings every which way. But to move it as close as 4 foot, you cannot have openings.
I'm moving 5 feet off.
No,
it's
no,
8 foot.
8.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you happy?
No.
You can work for that? But this is an exception. And then to move to the last thing that has nothing to do with those initial criteria, and we've talked about this quite a bit before, because of proximity to a buffer that is permanent in nature, can be otherwise demonstrated that a setback exception will not result in undue negative impact on adjacent property of the public welfare,
like a conservation tract.
Commercial property, publicly owned property, a public way.
Green space. There's been several green space dedications.
All that on Rock Ridge, they got a big creek back there, and 100-foot buffer anyway. So, and we're just going to look at those. And here again, I'm going to have kind of a list worked up of what we consider a buffer that's permanent in nature. And here again, it's an item that if somebody says, well, I've got this, and I think that is a buffer permanent in nature, but I don't think it is, and I'm not proving the application, they can appeal it.
Sure.
Probably would be a good idea to put a couple of examples of what you mean by buffer. That way that would give everybody guidance about what that meant.
Okay, I can do another list under that gives some examples. There's actually quite a few cases. I hate to get into mentioning them or anything.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But,
there's some examples of what buffer means. That way, anything that looks similar to that would be okay.
For example, and I've got it here too, but in y'all's, can you think of any situation where R1 property abuts commercial property that it wouldn't be okay for a 500 square foot maximum size accessory structure to be on a 4 foot setback on the side that's against that commercial property?
Is there any commercial zone that doesn't have a buffer built in?
Right. They've all got buffers built into the commercial zones. So typically I don't ever see a problem with that. So that would be one thing we could put on the list. Where it gets tricky is where you think about, the guy on the end of Claremont that built the RV shed. Close to the side property line where they had that those utility poles running down the side of the adjacent property. So, and when you go out there and you see that you got this really nice wide, feature that's nobody's ever going to build there, I'm comfortable saying that's a buffer that's permanent in nature, but I hate to use, I hate to say if it's at least a 20-foot easement or, it gets tricky. Mm-hmm. In that case, the utility company couldn't even verify that there was an easement there, but they did have a utility line run through there, so it was just obvious that
whatever it was, it'd be 4 feet plus whatever that was.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, how about if I take a stab at making another list and we bring this back and we refine it just a little bit?
Good.
A remaining question is, what is the relationship between the width of the lot dictating the depth of a rear setback?
Are you you're talking about on lots that are 1 acre or more?
Uh-huh. The wording right now says that rear setback is dictated by the width of the lot, and I don't understand that one.
Well, what you have in trying to accommodate a lot of different circumstances, you have rural properties that are like 10, 15 acres. But what you really have is a little homestead with a lawn right up by the street. And they may want to put a garage or accessory structure that serves the house, like a normal lot in town would. And that's not going to affect, it's not going to affect them because they have all this depth behind where they're wanting to put their building anyway. Okay. Then you have the other guy that wants to build a tractor barn. Okay. And he wants to set it on the very far back corner of his lot, as close as he can get it to the property line. Those are the buildings that can be, 3,500 square feet, and they look agricultural in nature. They're pole barns or something like that. And where that property might back up to R1 district of neighborhood or something like that. We actually had a case on one of the guys that built the big new house on Hatcher or Kellogg Acres Road, and then he built a shop back there. He started, doing a little digging and stuff and was going to put it as close as he could to the property line. And the neighbor behind him was on the cul-de-sac that was behind that big property and let us know what was going on. So we called the guy and said, hey man, that's got to be 25 foot from the property line. That's what it says. Oh, okay.
The 25 foot doesn't bother me. It's setting any other distance based on the width of the lot that puzzles.
Because the rural lots are so.
I'm open to other suggestions.
You got to have something to.
A lot of these rural lots, the frontage is not that wide.
Yeah, but if you've got one that's, let's Trammell Road, some of the older ones on Trammell Road are like 150 feet wide. So it's saying a maximum of 25. He could really go 15 and 15 with a 150 foot average width. We're not.
Let me put this in context of the rest of the ordinance too, okay? An accessory structure can be located, it either has to be placed on the rear half of the lot or behind the building line of the principal dwelling. So, you've got a guy that's got a house up close to the road like we were talking about, and he might want to build his tractor barn right there off the road. Okay? That could be a pretty big building, and next door, we're just trying not to crowd the next door neighbors. So where they have the room, where they have a wide lot, we're going to get the setback. Where we don't, they're going to end up setting it. Well, I don't know. Maybe we need to work on that. I don't have the right answer for every there's just so many.
I can see the value of a large lot setting it further back. You do that by dictating the depth of the rear setback by the width of the lot, as opposed to the depth.
So the side and the rear are the same?
Yeah.
Because when we define a number, it's 4 side, 4 rear.
Yeah.
So when we did it based on width, it's side and rear to keep this. It's not 2 numbers. It's not 2 numbers.
The rear, that one mystifies me.
They give you the same buffer on the side and the back.
But if it was 25, probably got it covered. Otherwise it's 25.
The goal here is just to have an increased setback on really large buildings. Now we're basing them, really any 0.8 acres or more, they can build a 3,500 square foot building with 17 foot sidewalls. And we want a big buffer on those. At the same time, we don't want to penalize people that are building a small building with 10 foot sidewalls, a garden shed or whatever. So, maybe we don't have this right. The truth of the matter is, y'all voted on it, so did the city council. So I said at one time it seemed like a good idea. So,
I think I argued back then too.
well, you did. That's correct.
If you want to change it, it's going to have to take another column in that table and an amendment so that the side and the rear are defined two different ways. We just define both of them to be the same distance. That's how it happened.
Continue.
Well, I mean, I'm done. I'm
Okay,
open to suggestions for a better answer on that.
No,
You know,
You were going to come back with it.
I'm perfectly fine with deletion of C. I mean, if you think that's still going to keep, and just leave it A, B, and C. You
that's
know,
what we'll do.
Okay. Yeah. And then if you want to take a stab at defining a list of in the bottom there, that if you want to, that's fine. Okay.
And then Mr. Middleton's going to work on the chart. No, I mean, if I come up with something or if Kevin comes up with a good suggestion, we might bring that back too. Otherwise, we'll just leave that one alone.
But again, look, the thought of the chart was the side and the rear were going to be the same number. I mean, like I say, if you're going to define it differently, we're going to have to take another column at it. You know, so
so far we're not having a problem. We're usually getting the 25 foot.
There you go. Let's not mess with it. If you see it tends to become a problem, then we'll tackle the issue.
Thank you.
Next item is Act 446. I briefed you briefly on this last meeting, and that's the new state law that tells cities and counties that they cannot dictate building style. And we have two issues in our current code, and they set minimum building footprint on R1 and R2, and a simple revision to the code to strike those two so they'll be in compliance with state law is what this is about. And to do it, we need to hold a public hearing next month.
Next month? Okay. Place it on the agenda.
You're saying that concerns the size of buildings?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The city can't regulate it, but a developer can with covenants.
Okay, I thought it was more
aesthetics,
decorations, and the size.
Oh, it specifically lists the building size. You cannot set a minimum residential building size.
Removing these items from the regulation, I don't know that it would ultimately reduce the amount of regulatory authority that the Vulcan area standards already provide you. Setbacks, lot coverage, a lot of those things already regulate the size of the built environment. So the need to have a specific square footage threshold is redundant. Sorry.
And most of the developers take care of it with bills of assurances anymore anyway, so.
I have asked Kevin, Vision 2040 has been meeting sporadically over the past year, and it's sooner or later the Planning Commission has to weigh in, because the Planning Commission will have to be making the recommendation to the City Council for the new comprehensive / land use plan for the city. And it's been slow going. It needs to pick up speed. And because this commission is sooner or later going to be involved, I asked Kevin if he would start giving us a little piece of information each month about the impact of the policies that are being recommended and the land use mandate that's being worked on, so that we'll start thinking about this seriously.
I'm not going to go into a tremendous amount of details. You have two documents. One is the narrative, essentially, that Mr. Walden, my counterpart, has produced, and the other is a copy of the land use map, which you have a large size of it, printed scale. And Mr. Walden is making progress. He's working his way northward on future land use map. You can see it sort of stops at 107 right now. But the other thing I wanted to point out to everybody right now is just to give you a quick review of the different land use classifications. wanted to make a point to do is just make an enhanced size snippet of the legend that's on the top left of the future land use map so that everybody on the commission is familiar. I'm sure most of you are, but this is just for the record to make sure everybody understands where these land use classes come into play with respect to the narrative document. Again, Mr. Walden being the project lead, he will be meeting with the Vision Plan Committee, I believe next week. Is that right? So you can see that if you wanted to look at your various land use classifications and the narratives in your plan document and compare those with future land use types on the legend, you can see that there's an immediate corollary. Right? So if you work your way from the top down, starting with the conservation area land use, which is the light green color, obviously you'll see a narrative that describes it N-con. So there's going to be zoning classifications and land use classifications throughout, but right now it's just providing you with the language that supports the different classifications. What the future land use map, in my opinion at this point, doesn't do, every possible scenario can't be conceived, right? From a land use policy standpoint, like we saw in Brockton, you're not going to be able to anticipate the market. But what you can do is use this as an opportunity to sort of create new land use classifications from a policy perspective that may or may not necessitate a new zone later, right? I'm not sure that the city wants a zone class, but what we do want to do is make sure that everybody's familiar with the array of land use policies and the land use classifications that we have and how they situate themselves in the city. So if there are development opportunity sites or areas that lay vacant or maybe underdeveloped grayfield development, that's obviously something for discussion. If that's something that the commission wants to look at, for instance, you have a zoning class called City Plaza District, very specific. You have walkable neighborhood, you have traditional neighborhood. A lot of these zone classes have their own zone, if you will, or overlay that legislatively can handle the typical zoning regulations, but they do so in an environment that's a little more creative and it lets the market sort of operate freely. So that's all that I have. Mr. Walden is going to provide you all with an update further than this, but right now, since he's the project manager, he just wanted to make sure that I brought various land use classifications and existing narrative to you all, and so that if you had any questions about the land use classifications, that we become familiar with them and we start to talk about them. And then we also, for the public's benefit, make them understand that this is the policy map. This is the map that drives the decisions on zoning in the future. So this is where, if I can borrow Mr. Middleton's words, it gets real, because it is real. This is your policy map. This is the thing that the decision makers will use in the future to help make decisions. Specific zoning and code language later on, that comes later. It's not so high, though, at the 50,000 foot level. I think we're coming down a little bit. I think with this amount of land use classification, you're getting to a point where the city can start to, from a land use policy standpoint, really start to look at its own future and decide, okay, where is the redevelopment likely to happen? Where do we want to concentrate some redevelopment, right, on existing? Where do we not want the pressure to go because of infrastructure constraints? Those are the types of decisions that have to be made at the land use policy level. So that's essentially all I have at the staff level. Like I said, my counterpart, Mr. Walden, will be coming and meeting with the committee next week. But I think Mr. Middleton is astute in wanting to use this venue as a way to sort of vocalize the need to participate, vocalize the need to look at these things because they are extremely important to the city.
Couple of observations. The one, James made the observation that of all the cities he's worked in, he had not seen one south of Kiel that had so little developable space left. All the development that's likely to occur is going to be north of Kiel. I mean, that's his sense of it. And that the rest is going to be either quality of life or historic district or recreation oriented to the south. Secondly, this is what you should pay some real attention to because it defines what all the land uses are. It tells you what they are and how they stand out. And the first part of it has the policies, and it's the policies that make a difference as to how you evaluate development proposals if it's consistent with the policies that this plan points out. Like if you say, for instance, that we think affordable housing is a good thing, then you don't have the entire city zoned R1 with a minimum lot size of 10,000 square feet. And that's what a policy does to dictate decision making. Those are important. And so you need to understand those things when you're looking at this map and asking yourself, does that make sense here? Or is the policy wrong? Or should we change the way the map looks? That's where it gets real.
You do have goal 2.2, for instance, and I'm using Brockington as an example because it's in our minds. You have policy 221 on page 23 of your document. Promote and encourage construction a town center style development near the intersection of Brockington Road and 107. Now, that's far removed, far north of the site we were talking about tonight, but it also speaks to the Brockington corridor too. What does the future land use map have to say about that entire corridor? Or is it truly unique to just this neighborhood level, local retail type of a town center type of development that's proposed in policy? Words mean a lot, especially when you're trying to codify it later on and attach zoning, attach setbacks, attach development standards. They do mean quite a bit.
And at least a portion of that map is online on the city's webpage. The first part basically up to Keel. When are we going to get the rest of it on the web, the link to the webpage?
A server issue. It will be up hopefully by tomorrow.
Outstanding, sir. That's all I've got.
Are you ready for a motion?
I am.
Also moved.
Second.
Easy.
All the roll.
Knight,
Yes.
Martin,
Aye.
Middleton,
Aye.
Bruno,
Aye.
Gillum.
Aye.
The May 14th meeting of the Board of Zoning Adjustment is called to order. Please call the roll.
Knight,
Yes, here.
Martin,
Here.
Middleton,
Here.
Bruno,
Here.
Gillum.
Here. You received the minutes of the last meeting. Are there any corrections, additions? I have a
Motion to approve.
Second. I have a motion.
Sorry. Knight,
Yes.
Martin,
Aye.
Middleton,
Aye.
Bruno,
Aye.
Gillum.
Aye.
I have no other additions to the agenda. Does anybody else?
No, sir.
Then we'll move on to item number 5.
A variance request of 10 feet into the required 25 feet rear yard setback at 8709 Stillwater for a home addition, Rudy Villarreal, owner.
Okay, since this is the Board of Zoning Adjustment, it is a quasi-judicial body. Any statements you made will be made under oath. Kevin, will you promise to tell the truth and the whole truth in any statements you make before this body?
Yes, sir. So, before you have a staff report very similar to your commission reports. This one is for 8709 Stillwater Road. This is a request for variance. The consideration before you is a rear yard setback for a garage addition. The subject property, 8709 Stillwater, the parcel ID is for you, and it is roughly 0.30 acres plus or minus. Consideration, the rear yard building to the property line setback of 10 feet in lieu of the required 25. It's what's being requested. I took the liberty of using some technical magic to scale the building envelope as submitted by the applicant in their sketch drawing, which is good, by the way. And I allowed my GIS environment to sort of sketch that to scale relative to the existing parcel lines, and I also scaled out the 25-foot, the 15-foot, and the 10-foot setback lines in relation to the proposed garage addition. So what you're looking at is the new building envelope that's been recently constructed. It's not available on a lot of the buildings GIS because the development is too new. So we had to produce it. You all can see what's happening in space. As you can see, the 25-foot setback line is almost bisecting the proposed addition. There's a 2-car side-loaded garage that basically hits right about there where so there's a driveway that extends up. and the vehicles turn. If you're looking at it from the street, you come up and you turn left, and there's two bays right here. Right now, the applicant has two vehicles in there. One of the two vehicles happens to be a very lovely hobby car. Very, very nice antique Ford. Anyhow, but the applicant wants to obviously enjoy his two-car garage for his vehicle, but also space for his hobby. So that's essentially what's going on here. In your report, you'll notice that you have an existing single-family detached dwelling. Its surrounding uses are all residential. This is R1 everywhere. It's a pretty tight building environment. One of the things I did want to point out before I get into some of the other narrative is that there's a retaining wall back here. And I'm sorry I could dig into my thumb drive to find some photos, but if you come up here and you look into the rear yard here, there's a lot of retaining wall back here. So the structures to the south that you see in the imagery are actually, their yards are actually perched up a little bit higher, to the tune of around 3 to 4 feet. So there has to, because the topography in this area is such, it slopes downward toward the street, there has to be some retention. So that is sort of squeezing the site a little bit to the back, but that's really, you can see the retaining wall a little bit in relation to the parcel line, but the aerial photos are off. So the retention wall that's there now is actually coincident with the property line. So even though you can see it in the imagery and it looks like it's offset, the retaining wall actually depicted in the aerial photo is where those property lines now sit. So you have a couple of sections of our regulations. One is that you have 14.1F3, rear yard. There shall be a rear yard setback for principal building having a depth not less than 25 feet. And then the variance section, I just wanted to put that in the report for the commission. I'm sure you all have seen this before. The variance may be granted in the following instances only, where by reason of exceptional narrowness, shallowness, depth, or shape, or other extraordinary situation or condition on a specific property of record, that result in peculiar and exceptional practical difficulties, peculiar hardship upon such property. You all can impose conditions, but that's the key here: is this property peculiar, is exceptional, is it unique? And the applicant's request for a rear yard structure property line setback is predicated on the notion that it's pie-shaped. It's the language that the applicant actually. It restricts the lot's reasonable use. At least that's their assertion, and further implicates the pie shape as being synonymous with regular. That's my language, right? So the applicant's using pie shape. It's a common term you see, and they're using that with respect to being irregular. And that's my insight into it. And other verbiage consistent with the criteria found in 1414.03b. Zoning case law throughout the country has required commissioners and boards consider if hardships are self-imposed when deliberating on bulk and area variance requests. And I can point to some, but that's staff's professional opinion, is that you have to consider whether the hardship is self-imposed or not. We are recommending that this particular application be denied based on the application sitting before us, because staff does not feel as though this lot is unique. It is a cul-de-sac where you do have the shape of the lot that kind of flares outward, because it is at the end of the cul-de-sac. Other recently constructed lots in the area, the developer chose to combine one of the lots at the end of the cul-de-sac to make it wider, so that they don't run into these issues. This just happens to be one of those that didn't. Other lots in the area that have been recently built also do not slope up. I didn't see very many lots of this size that slope upward where the garage comes in on the side. So those lots that do are generally wider, and they can accommodate in the first place. But the rationale here is that the hardship is self-imposed. They don't have to have accessory garage that's attached for their hobby. They want that. But the lot itself is not unique in that respect. Beyond the report, and Mr. Wilson actually, it speaks to a little bit about his knowledge on setbacks and accessory buildings. Staff is understanding that outside the scope of this application before you, that there was perhaps other options. I will qualify the staff's decision on denial based on the fact that this isn't the only option. that the applicant has. In fact, when I was there visiting the site, the applicant showed me that there were other options. I said, that's great, but staff is responsible to report on the submittal that you paid for and that staff is reviewing. So I wasn't about to start second guessing the analysis that was. But that's a little bit of a digression. So right now, the staff recommendation is that the denial of this request is warranted based on the fact that the law is not unique, and that the hardship is self-imposed for this particular request. I'll entertain any questions.
Are there any questions of staff? Is Mr. Villarreal here?
Yes.
Do you wish to make a statement?
Yes, sir. I've got some pictures and some. Bring up, if I could.
If you would, come up here and sign in. In any statement that you are about to make, will you tell the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir, I will.
Okay. Mission before you right now is to confirm why you believe that this lot is unique in its characteristics and why sticking to the regulations would cause undue hardship. That's the two cases that you have to make.
I do have the some pictures of the retainer wall and all that if you would like to see them. 8 copies.
Thank you.
Also drew out a layman's term, I guess you could call it, of the property and the retainer wall, which is 4 foot tall, and it goes all across along the back of the property and along down one side. Behind the retainer wall, there's about 3 foot to 4 foot of gravel up to the privacy fence, and then the width of the driveway coming up to it at the very back is 53.5 foot wide. I guess the main concern with crossing over into the 25 foot variance would be fire. The general area where the garage would be, the neighbor directly behind where the garage would be located, happens to have a swimming pool there, and he's got about 6 foot of gravel behind the fence, and then about 4 foot of concrete around the swimming pool, and the pool's about 10 foot wide before it gets to his home. So as far as a safety factor, I believe the firewall and the gravel and the pool and all that, could be considered. I believe Kevin said that it's a garage. Basically, it's not for a hobby shop. I've got a 1-ton dually, 4-door. That's 24 garage. Basically, that's about it. Just the only other thing that I wanted to mention, have y'all look at those pictures.
What is the undue hardship that you're asserting?
I was thinking it was the pie shape of the property and the elevation, which is about 5 to 6 foot above the street level.
You're alleging that that's unique, but what's the hardship?
Don't really have a hardship. I was under the understanding that the hardship was the shape of the property. That's what I was going by.
The shape of the property and the strict application of the regulation would have to cause an undue hardship. So there's two things you have to satisfy. One is the unique characteristics of the property, which is up for grabs.
Okay.
But the undo, we have a regulation here, and everybody has to abide by it unless the lot itself creates a hardship. And I guess I'm hearing that there may be another option available to you.
If I was to downsize on the size, would that be a factor then?
If you can get it within setback requirements.
25. As long as it's attached.
If on that very last page on the handout that I gave y'all, into that 25 foot, actually it's only 10 foot at the front of the garage door. And the plans are to match the rest of the house, which is the 28 foot length of the garage right next to it. At the 28 foot, I'd be only 3 foot into the 25. So if I was to downsize the garage down to instead of the 19 foot garage, knock it down to 14 foot, then that would give me approximately 20 foot from the outside wall to my property line. And if you see the retainer wall goes out at an angle, so with the garage 28 foot and 14 foot width, at the back of the garage I would be 27 foot. So I'd already be 2 foot into the plus side.
It would still be,
sir?
It would still be beyond the requirements.
Yes, sir. I'd still need 5 foot in the front. But in 13 feet, 0, which would be approximately half of the length of the garage.
You saying you think you could get it within the 25 foot setback?
No, I'd be 20 foot. I would still need 5 foot at the very front. The reason it needs to be 14 foot, the truck is 8.5 foot wide. It's a 1-ton dually. And then to get it in there because of the 90-degree turn into the driveway, into the garage, it would take some maneuverability to get it in there.
My understanding that an accessory structure could do the job.
It falls outside the bill of assurance.
He says it falls outside the bill of assurance, but
in what way?
I need you to say that. You're under oath.
That, say what now, sir?
You tell me an accessory structure is beyond the bill of assurance?
Yes, sir.
No, it is not. I built a house adjacent to the property you're talking about. There's one across the street from the one I built that has an accessory structure in the backyard. It matches the architecture of the house. It's not outside the bill of assurance to build an accessory structure in that neighborhood.
Not limited to 200 square feet.
Now, that is a different story. It's not what you said. You said it's outside the bill of assurance to build an accessory structure, which is incorrect.
Build it big enough to get it moving.
Yeah. This is Scott Jones. He's the person that built our home. I'm planning on using him to add the garage if I got the okay too. It would definitely look like the rest of the house. I wanted it to look like it was all done at the same time.
Yeah. Can I sign in?
your name is?
My name is Scott Jones.
Any statement you make, you will swear to tell the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Any statement to this body?
Yes, sir. The bill of assurance limits him 200 square feet accessory structure, not big enough to get trucking. So when we first started looking at this, he was wanting to build a detached building, which we could comply with the city, but we can't comply with the bill of assurance. So we're asking the city to let us do it as an attached structure.
It's like we're between a rock and a hard place. That sounds like we're between a rock and a hard place on this one.
In relation to these, but Chairman, I have a question.
Yeah.
In relation to these pictures 1, 2, 3, 4, where would this structure that you're asking for the variance on, or the exception on, or whatever the wording is, would it be? Where would the structure be in relation to picture 1, 2, 3, or 4?
On picture number 4.
4.
Yes, sir. That's the existing wall of the garage, and it would be coming out toward the retainer wall.
He wants to build it right there.
Where would his drive?
On the other side, drives on.
Yeah, the other double car garage is that one that you're looking at right there where the wall is. There's 2 of them facing out, and the new one would come out right. It would take down about half of that wooden privacy fence.
Chair, has there been any comments from neighbors, or are they aware of this variance request? As I walk the neighborhoods, occasionally I see a sign that they've requested a variance.
There should be a sign.
Yes, we put.
Yes,
Sir.
yeah.
There was a sign posted like
In the front, yeah, there was a sign in his front yard.
Hang on.
We've taken several calls regarding this, and every one of his neighbors so far have said as long as it doesn't affect their property, they're fine with it. 2 of them actually said they were going to come tonight, I guess.
I talked
you
to,
are a neighbor? Okay.
I talked to a man whose house is behind this house, and he had no problem with it at all. We put the sign out like Andy told me, and Candy, 7 days prior to the meeting, and we sent out the 7 registered letters to the 4 neighbors that are tied into my back fence line, the neighbor on either side of the house, and the neighbor across the street. They were all registered letters, and we got the copies back from all of them that they received the letters.
Any commissioners have any further questions of these? Thank you. Again, the issue before you is whether the unusual characteristic of this lot, an undue hardship on the property owner. The wall itself, as I understand it, is the property line, so that is a non-issue. It's a pie-shaped lot, which is next door to a pie-shaped lot, which is next door to a pie-shaped lot. I don't know that there's anything unique that causes a problem with enforcement of the regulations. So the question then becomes, do you believe that there is an undue hardship by imposing the regulations on this lot?
Well, my question is, where does he park the dually? I mean, that could be a hardship. You got a $75,000 vehicle sitting out there, you don't have a place to park.
Yes, sir.
Now, like I say, I can write a book about what I don't know, Mr. Chairman. But I do know if you've got a vehicle of that magnitude, I wonder where it says to sit on the street, other than the garage or where.
I've been really concerned with the weather lately, all the breadth of the hail and all, and that is a $60,000 vehicle that I'd love to get it into a garage for that reason.
So like I
It
say,
sits out now?
sir?
It sits out now?
Yes, sir.
In this type of neighborhood, you got a big truck like it sitting out.
I've got, like I said, the driveway comes from the street on up about 40 feet, and it's wide at the back. I just have it parked back there out in the environment.
Again, the issue
I understand.
is it's self-imposed. And it's the fact that it's a large vehicle that self-imposes it. And there's a 2-car garage already that it could be parked in. It's a tough call, but I don't know that there's an undue hardship that would justify. And remember, you do something like this, and it's precedence.
As hard as it is to go with that, I have to make a motion tonight based on lack of heart.
I agree with Mr. Bruno and second the motion.
We have a motion and a second. And I assume that this is based on the lot not being, in our opinion, unique, and that we do not recognize an undue hardship.
Correct.
Debatable that it's unique, but it's not debatable.
Shaped lots all over the city, so.
We have a motion and a second.
Knight,
No.
Martin.
Aye.
Middleton.
Aye.
Bruno.
Aye.
Gillum.
I is to deny.
Aye is to deny.
Aye.
Thank you, sir.
There's no other business. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So move. Second.